Welcome, everyone, to the Ready for the Draft podcast. I'm your host, Gregg Schutze. This is episode 31 of the 2024 podcast series, where we take a look at the draft-eligible prospects and get you ready for the NFL draft. And look, NFL draft is just a few days away. I'm recording this podcast on Sunday, April 21st. The draft will begin Thursday, April 25th in Detroit, Michigan. Countdown is on. Smoke screens galore, talk, all kinds of talk all over the place. Who's going to be that number 2 pick in the draft? Is it going to be J.J. McCarthy now? There's rumors that maybe he's going to be the pick because Jaden Daniels and his agent were not happy with the fact that, Washington decided that they were going to bring in literally everybody at that quarterback position at the same time, as opposed to just having a private one-on-one with Jaden Daniels. So I think about J.J. McCarthy and that rise, that meteoric rise that we saw, right? Reminds you a lot of Zach Wilson. So it's one of those things that you just caution that. Is it true? I mean, is J.J. McCarthy truly going to go number 2 overall? You just think about that meteoric rise with Zach Wilson and what happened. J.J. McCarthy is not Zach Wilson. I'm not saying that. You see what he was able to do. Only one loss at Michigan. Look, Michigan, though, they were led on that defense. They were led by that running game. J.J. McCarthy, he got to make the plays when he needed to. And yes, he could have potentially put up similar numbers to all of the other prospects in this year's draft had he played at a more pass-happy offense and a more pass-happy university. But, he's there at Michigan. But here's still the thing. Is it truly the fact that everybody was that far behind watching the film with J.J. McCarthy? I still look at it. I think it's really a big risk. I think there are other guys that are out there that you watch their game and you feel a lot more confident. Just because Jim Harbaugh says J.J. McCarthy should be the number 1 quarterback taken doesn't mean you just automatically go ahead and do that. I look at it. Honestly, you look at Drake May. Drake May is kind of the forgotten quarterback. And it kind of feels like some of the smokescreens and some of the talk when we saw Will Levis start rising ahead of C.J. Stroud and a lot of these other quarterbacks. I think Drake May is a guy that could easily come off the board at number 2 overall. He and Caleb Williams, just like Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud, were the top 2 quarterbacks the entire year. So that conversation, it's one of those things. Could it very well just be a smokescreen? What's going on there? Drake May, the relationship with Josh McCown. Again, I keep saying I could see Drake May in Minnesota. I think Jaden Daniels, if he doesn't go to Washington, that's going to be an interesting. Does New England decide to go with Jaden Daniels, a different type of quarterback than what we've seen with the Pats? Does he fit into an Alex Van Pelt offense? That's the other question that you have to ask. And I don't know that he's the right guy, the right fit. So it may be that Drake May goes number 3, which then means Minnesota can get their hands on Jaden Daniels. Really wild stuff. And then there's Michael Penix Jr. and the fact that he could come off the board at number 13 to the Raiders. I just don't see that happening. I think there's just too much with Michael Penix's game that says, you know what, they should be trading back into round 1 to ultimately target Michael Penix Jr. I just don't see him being a guy that's going to be taken at number 13 overall. The deep ball, a lot of the intangibles, absolutely, but there's still holes in his game, and it's one of those things to where, plus, you got to think about the injuries. 4 straight years at Indiana, 4 straight season-ending injuries, and yes, he's played 2 injury-free years, but that was also against, or behind an offensive line that was among the nation's best and was the Joe Moore Award-winning offensive line this past season. So you put him against consistent pressure, what happens? That's going to be a huge question mark for me, and that's why I think ultimately if the Raiders want to target Michael Penix Jr., you trade back into round 1 or you get him there with your 2nd round pick. Hey, if you need to trade up into that 1st or 2nd pick in round number 2, do it. If you're thinking about 2nd round, or you trade back into round 1, there are going to be teams that are going to be looking to trade back anyway. Get into the 20s and land them there. That's really, there's all these conversations. It's going to be a lot of fun getting into the draft. And really what we're here for with episode 31 is playing by the numbers with the linebacker position. So we've taken a look at virtually every position, the entire offense plus the guys up front. Now we're taking a look at that linebacker spot. And when I talk about by the numbers, I'm not talking about analytics. Analytics has all their fun with a lot of the different numbers. The numbers in this case are very different because I'm just looking at how many players are drafted at each position in each round of the draft, and then taking a look at this year's draft class. Can I plug those guys in to each of those rounds and ultimately see not only can we predict how many players at each position are taken, but also in which round these players will get drafted, and see really how everything shakes out. So when we look at this linebacker position, we'll go ahead and jump into this now because we've got a lot to cover in a short period of time. Linebackers. We know that off-ball linebackers are, that's kind of a devalued position, right? Much like the running back. When we look at the group, though, you've also got edge rushers who are typically linebackers. Dallas Turner is one this year. Before that, his teammate there at Alabama, Will Anderson Jr., was also considered a linebacker because, frankly, that's really what he was coming into the draft. So when we look at this, it's not just the off-ball linebackers. We're also looking at some of the edge rushers who happen to be linebackers as well. So that's something else to keep in mind when we talk about linebackers. But last year was the lowest that we had seen in the last 5 years, in terms of linebackers taken. Just 25. I'm looking at this group, and I've got a number that's even lower than that this year. We're potentially talking about as few as 23 linebackers taken in this year's draft. I mean, it's insane numbers. In 2022, we saw 33. 2021, there were 27. 2020, 32. And 2019, there were 36. So a lot of guys coming off the board at this linebacker spot. But as the positions kind of devalue, we're seeing fewer and fewer guys drafted. I think, really the thing to do is to take a look at each of these drafts, go through each of these positions, talk through where a lot of these guys landed, and look, some of these guys that are showing up as linebackers, I think maybe we would consider them ends. So it's one of those things where between you look at the defensive ends and the linebackers, these numbers may be a little inflated. It'll be interesting as we get through this conversation just how many of these guys are true linebackers, and we're true linebackers coming into the draft. When we look at 2023, we had 3 linebackers come off the board in round number 1. Now again, 2022 we had 2. 2021 there were 5, then 4 in each of those 2 years in 2019 and 2020. Those 3 that came off the board in 2023: Will Anderson Jr., Jack Campbell, Nolan Smith. Now we know Will Anderson Jr. is legit. Texans trading up to that number 3 spot to get him. Jack Campbell at 18. The Lions, really a surprise there. But you look at the athleticism, you look at the production. Lions were definitely looking for and targeting a playmaker at that linebacker position, which was why they stuck to their board and they went with Campbell. Nolan Smith is going to play a much larger role there in Philly in 2024. You look at round number 2, only 2 guys taken. That's really 2022 was an interesting draft because you had 6, but 2 is kind of that magic number in round 2 because we had 2 also off the board in 2019 and 2020. This past year's draft, Derek Hall going to the Seahawks and B.J. Ojulari going to the Cardinals. Round 3, Drew Sanders. It was really interesting. Drew Sanders, Trenton Simpson, when you talk about off-ball linebackers, those 2 guys fell to round 3, and there was talk that they may end up coming off the board in round 1. I know I mocked Drew Sanders going to the Bills in round 1. Bills ended up waiting and ended up taking Dorian Williams out of Tulane in round number 3, number 91 overall, and he looks like he's a pretty solid player for them. Drew Sanders going to the Broncos. DJ Johnson out of Oregon going to the Panthers. Deion Henley, I think, will get more playing time there with the Chargers there, number 85 overall, especially with Kenneth Murray off the roster. Trenton Simpson looks like he's going to be a starter there with the Ravens now that Patrick Queen is gone. 86 overall. DeMarvion Overshown should have a bigger role now that Leighton Vander Esch is retired there with the Cowboys. And then, as I mentioned, one pick later, Dorian Williams there to the Bills. Round 4, Ventrell Miller and Nick Herbig. Herbig getting some time as a pass rusher there with the Steelers. I'd like to see more time from Yasir Abdullah there with the Jags. He was taken with the first pick in round 5, 136 overall. Then you get Noah Sewell, Servassier Dennis, Nick Hampton, saw some time as a pass rusher for the Rams. Henry To'oto'o to the Texans. He's starting there now. Owen Papo should get a bit larger role there with the Cards. All those guys taken in round number 5. That was 6 of them. That's the highest that we've seen come off the board in round 5 since 2019, where we saw 11. 11. It's insane. Zaire Barnes out of Western Michigan. Jose Ramirez to the Bucks. That was the pass rusher there, double-digit sack guy. Amari Burney, Titus Leo out of Wagner. D. Winters and Jalen Graham rounded things out at the end of round 6 and into round 7, going to the 49ers. 2022, again, 33 guys taken in the 2022 draft. We saw only 2 come off the board in round 1, both off-ball linebackers. Quay Walker going to the Packers, Devin Lloyd to the Jags at number 22 and 27, respectively. Both of those guys, I mean, come on. They're both starters for their teams. Arnold Ebiketie looks like a keeper there for the Falcons in round 2 at 38 overall. You got David Ojabo and Boye Mafe. Mafe coming off the board at number 40. Ojabo at 45. Mafe, look, he was leading Seattle in sacks. David Ojabo, on the other hand, has struggled mightily. Troy Anderson had a great freshman year. Great rookie year, but ultimately struggled, battled some injuries there in 2023. Drake Jackson hasn't made that impact that I think the 49ers were expecting of him when he was taking number 61 overall. Broncos getting Nick Benito. He's been a guy that's been able to get home as an edge rusher for the Broncos. Round 3, you got Brian Asamoah, Chad Muma, who have been essentially role players for Minnesota and Jacksonville. Christian Harris, though, to the Texans, gotten some nice playoff experience. 75 overall, strong side linebacker. D'Angelo Malone for the Falcons, another edge rusher. Then you look at Nakobe Dean at number 83. Look, he's kind of the heart and soul of that defense at that linebacker position. You look at Terrell Bernard, much bigger role there with the Bills, 89 overall. Channing Tindall. Then you get to Leo Chenal with the Chiefs, 103 overall. Look, he's got a couple of Super Bowl rings there. He's been stepping up and playing well for them. Brandon Smith, then in round 4, just 1 taken in round 4 that year. And then Michael McFadden coming out of Indiana, a starter for the Giants. Tyreek Smith, DeMarco Jackson, Damone Clark, going to see more playing time with the Cowboys. Malcolm Rodriguez comes off the board in round number 6. Same with James Houston, the 4th. 217 overall to the Lions. He's been a guy that has proven to be able to get after the quarterback. 2021, this was the year that Micah Parsons comes off the board, number 12 overall. Absolute stud. Hey, make a Pro Bowl at defensive end and linebacker, why don't you? Zaven Collins hasn't really emerged yet there in Arizona, taking number 16 overall. Jamin Davis, kind of the same thing with Washington, number 19. Jason Odafe, he was Jason Owe when he was drafted, but Odafe Owe, 31 overall. More potential than production. I would say with him, it's a lot of similar to Chop Robinson when you look at him. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, 32 overall to the Bucks. He hasn't really emerged the way that the Bucks I think were expecting. You get Azeez Ojulari, with the Giants. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, Nick Bolton coming off the board in round number 2. We know what he's meant for the Chiefs. Pete Werner's a starter for the Saints. Round 3, you got Chaz Surratt, Monty Rice. Then you get Ernest Jones. I mean, this guy is, 130, 140 tackle guy with the Rams, 103 overall. Baron Browning with the Broncos, been an outside linebacker looking to put some pressure there. Derek Barnes, was a leader there in that linebacking core for the Lions. He and Alex Anzalone. The rest of this group, KJ Britt to the Bucks in round number 5, 176 overall. He's a guy that is looking to probably start this year. Nick Neiman, 6th rounder to the Chargers at the top of round number 6, 185 overall. He's another guy that is looking to probably start. Isaiah McDuffie is, he filled in nicely for Devondre Campbell. He's now the likely starter for the Packers, at least right now. And he came off the board number 220 overall. You get to 2020, and that's the draft where we had some big hitters there, right? Isaiah Simmons, the freakish. What position does he truly play? Number 8 overall, not quite the impact that we were expecting. Kenneth Murray has moved on from the Chargers. He's now with the Titans. He was 23 overall. Jordan Brooks no longer with the Seahawks. Patrick Queen no longer with the Ravens. They went off the board back-to-back, 27 and 28. Josh Uche, a pass rusher for the Patriots. Then you get Willie Gay, the Chiefs. He's also moved on since winning a couple of rings, 63 overall, getting some money there. Logan Wilson has been a nice, effective starter there for the Bengals. I was really high on him coming out of Wyoming. At the top of round number 3, 65 overall, Zach Bonds moved on from the Saints. Malik Harrison, a guy that I was expecting a little bit more from there with the Ravens. He's more of a role player. Same with Akeem Davis-Gaither with Cincy at the top of round number 4. Michael Walker has gotten some playing time there with the Falcons. I believe he's moved on since then. Travis Gibson, I want to say, is it Indy that he's moved on to from Chicago? He's taken in round number 5. You look at round 6 and 7, not a ton of guys really stand out, except for Casey Toohill. Round number 7, 233 overall, a guy that was showing that he can get after the passer, set a career high with 5 sacks this past season at Washington, but he was drafted by the Eagles, so this is a guy that's kind of bounced around, and that's really the thing, is some of these guys are going to have to find another place to really find that time on the field. I think a lot of these guys struggle to get on the field. They find the right place, the right fit, and then that's where they really emerge and things take off. 2019 was a fun draft. That's where you have Devin White and Josh Allen coming off the board, 5 and 7 overall. Devin White going to the Eagles now on a 1-year deal, leaving the Bucks. Josh Allen, I want to say he was franchise tagged there with the Jags. Devin Bush, number 10 overall. Man, 6 picks later, Brian Burns. Imagine Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau playing next to each other. Good Lord. Or opposite each other. Good Lord. That's going to be a fun pass rush to watch there in New York. Jelani Tavai, kind of a surprising pick there at number 43 by the Lions out of Hawaii. You saw that Dan Campbell ends up jumping in, getting another linebacker. That didn't really pan out. Jermaine Pratt, still a starter for the Bears, coming out of NC State in round number 3. First pick of the linebackers in round 3, the 8th pick in round 3. 72 overall. Sione Takitaki was a starter there for the Browns. He's moved on, but he was a round 3 guy. Cody Barton, Bobby Okereke, Quincy Williams, all guys that have seen starting time. Drew Tranquil out of Notre Dame to the Chargers in round 4. He got a lot of playing time down the stretch in the playoffs with the Chiefs. He's a guy that's likely going to be a starter there. Dre Greenlaw was taken in round number 5, 148 overall. And yes, I know that he tore the Achilles there at the Super Bowl, but dude, the guy's a player. I mean, that's the thing that the 49ers are so good with. They'll sit there and target a linebacker that's going to fit their system later on in the draft, and they can plug him right in. Andrew Van Ginkel, proven to be a pretty solid pass rusher. Mac Wilson, he's been kind of a journeyman a little bit. Blake Cashman is, he was drafted by the Jets in round number 5, went to the Texans. He's moved on since then, but a guy that has proven to be a competent starter in the middle of a defense. Cole Holcomb, battling some injuries there, but he's a guy that has also proven he can play fast. David Long going to the Titans in round number 6, been a starter there as well. Ty Summers, a surprise there in round number 7, for the Packers. Got some playing time, some starting experience there at 226 overall. That was really, you saw a lot of the Packers taking more and more linebackers, because if you got Ty Summers ultimately starting for you, he's a good instinctive linebacker, but it's one of those things to where they needed the playmakers. And that's really what they were looking for there. I think Ty Summers still, though, is a guy that could be a solid pick, a guy that you could put in as a spot starter. You just don't want him starting every single game for you. So that's kind of a look at the last 5 years and really what this all looks like. So, again, 5-year average, 30.6. A lot of that is due to that 2019 draft where we saw 36 linebackers taken. I mean, when you talk about it, 21 of those 36 were taken in rounds 5 through 7, which is insane. Then you look at the 3-year average. It's down to 28. So you went from 30.6 to 28.3 to that 3-year average because we saw two of the lowest numbers in 2021 with 27, 2023 with just 25. So when you look at the first round, we talked about the guys coming off the board. 5-year average is 3.6. 3-year average is just over 3. And we haven't had a single draft where only one linebacker was taken in round 1. So history tells us we should have 2 linebackers coming off the board in round number 1 at a minimum, which means Dallas Turner, we already know, is going to be the first linebacker taken. I honestly believe that Laiatu Latu is a, I look at Atlanta, best defensive player in this draft could very well be Laiatu Latu. I think when you talk about Dallas Turner, you have to talk about the fact that this guy, the production is there. 10 sacks, 10 and a half sacks. You're wondering, could he step out of Will Anderson's shadow and be his own man? He's actually been able to do that. There's just the raw speed, the raw athleticism that you see with Dallas Turner. I mean, at 6'3", 247 pounds with just under 34.5-inch arms, running a 4.4, 640, 40.5-inch vertical leap. The athleticism is absolutely off the charts. And I think that's one of the things that everyone is expecting from Dallas Turner is, look, this is a guy that you get him at that level, and even though Latu's floor may be higher, the ceiling is going to be way higher for Dallas Turner because of all the athleticism and all those traits. 14.5 tackles for loss, 10 sacks this past season, but 32.5 tackles for loss and 22.5 sacks in his 3-year career at Bama. 53 total tackles this past season as well, so very active. I look at him, and if he doesn't go to Atlanta, it's at 8, which is where I have him penciled in right now with my draft, but I keep leaning towards Latu going to the Falcons just because I think he's still the best player on the defensive side of the football in this year's draft. Dallas Turner can end up coming off the board. I think number 12 makes a heck of a lot of sense. The Broncos need pass rush help. You get him in there with Jonathan Cooper and Nick Bonito, and you let him run, roam around and run downhill, make some plays for you. I think that makes a lot of sense. Edgerrin Cooper is the next linebacker that will come off the board. Where does Edgerrin Cooper go? Is he, does he come off the board at number 20 to the Steelers? Steelers need inside backer help. But that feels way too rich for Edgerrin Cooper at this point. This guy really had his breakout season in 2023. Do you want to take the chance on getting that guy at number 20 overall, top 20 pick? Especially when you need all that offensive line help. I don't know that makes a lot of sense. Especially because I think the depth of this group really is going to lie in that second, third, fourth, maybe even the 5th round at this linebacker spot. I look at Arizona at 27. That's a potential landing spot for Edgerrin Cooper. They need help putting pressure on the quarterback. I think that's one of the things that anybody can agree upon there. Your leading sack guy with the Cardinals is Dennis Gardeck with 6. When you look at that inside linebacking group, Kaiser White, Chris Barnes, Mac Wilson, Owen Papo. But if you have a chance to bring in Edgerrin Cooper, you get that pass rush ability that you're sorely lacking on this roster. And again, I think they'll also need to tackle that edge rush position as well. But when you look at Edgerrin Cooper, 17 tackles for loss, 8 sacks, 84 total tackles, a couple of pass breakups as well, has 8 in his career. Prior to this year, though, just a half a sack. and 13 tackles for loss. So this was really his breakout year, emerging as a senior. And is he worthy of that first round pick? I mean, we see where Jack Campbell came off the board. The production for days, and the athleticism to go with it. He comes off the board at 18 overall, but he's got that body of work that Edgerrin Cooper just doesn't have. Edgerrin Cooper, at the draft was a 4.5 140, 34-inch vertical leap at 6'2" and 230 pounds. Looked pretty smooth in the drills as well. But I think he's ultimately going to be a day 2 guy. I really do. I think that's really where Cooper is going to wind up. And there are a few different areas that he could go. I think Washington could be a possibility. Tennessee maybe. But I look at the Carolina Panthers. I think they go wide receiver at 33, but at 39, it just feels like this could be the right spot. I think Carolina could look to add another edge rusher there, but I think the additions of Jadeveon Clowney and DJ Wonnum, who had 17.5 sacks between the two of them last year, might temper that need just a little bit. Shaq Thompson spent all 8 seasons in Carolina, but look, he's 30 years of age by the time the season starts. He'll be a free agent at the end of the season. Josie Jewell signed to a 3-year deal to line up at the other spot. Instinctive, tallied over 100 tackles in 3 of his 6 years in the league. He's not the explosive athlete that Edgerrin Cooper is. I think you get a trio there, you get that group, that feels like that makes a lot of sense. I mean, shoot, Carolina, they finished dead last in the NFL in sacks with just 27 a season ago. This is a dude that's able to get after the quarterback. But this is also a guy, he checks a lot of the boxes. He can fly to the boundary on one play, chase down the running back to get to the perimeter, flies downhill, shooting gaps the next, can drop into coverage a little bit. So Edgerrin Cooper, to me, round 2 at the top, feels like that makes a lot of sense. We look at round 2, and 3 of the last 5 seasons, we've actually seen 2 linebackers come off the board. When we talk about it, especially because 2021, 2022, we saw 4 and 6 come off the board in round number 2. The 3-year average is 4. 5-year average is at just over 3. But this is a group, because of the way that the depth that a lot of the other positions are, and the fact that this position has been so devalued. Like, if we look at the draft last year, you had all those edge rushers at the linebacker position that came off the board, right? Will Anderson, Nolan Smith, Derek Hall, BJ Ojulari. They were taken in the first 2 rounds, right? We only have 5 come off the board in the first 2 days. Who else do we have from a edge rush position? Gabriel Murphy, I think, is a round 3 guy. He could come off the board in round 2. I think that I wouldn't be shocked if that happens. But I've got him penciled in as a 3rd rounder. Off-ball linebackers, Drew Sanders was supposed to come off the board, like I said, round 1, round 2 at the latest. He and Trenton Simpson they both fell to round number 3. I look at this group, and I can't make a justification to have anyone else come off the board in round 2. Payton Wilson, to me, is a guy that had he had a healthy career, we'd be talking about Payton Wilson as following in the footsteps of Jack Campbell. You look at the stats speak for themselves, but 402 tackles, 48 tackles for loss, 15 sacks, 7 interceptions, 13 pass breakups. This dude did it all. And you tuned in, you watched number 11. He flew around to the football, was the ACC Defensive Player of the Year this past season. 138 tackles, 17.5 going for loss, 6 sacks, 3 interceptions, 6 pass breakups, a forced fumble, a couple of fumble recoveries. Then he shows up at the combine and wants to show off, hey, you know what, I'm healthy. I'm perfectly healthy. 6'4", 233, runs a 4.4, 340 with a 1.54, 10-yard split. Feels a lot like Jack Campbell. The only difference is the shoulder injury, major shoulder injury, and an ACL. That's the part that scares you with Payton Wilson is, where are we at with the medicals. I haven't seen anything really come out against it, but it is one of those things that makes you nervous. It gives you a little bit of pause. And if you were to take him in round number 2, you might end up taking him in round number 3. I'm a huge fan of Payton Wilson's. I think he should come off the board in round number 2. That makes a lot of sense to me. But because of the injuries and such, what do you do? Where do you end up having him come off the board? I think Seattle makes a ton of sense. Wherever Seattle ends up taking him, Seattle feels like the right spot. They lose Bobby Wagner. They lose Jordan Brooks. They bring in Jerome Baker, a longtime starter there at Miami, who injured his MCL in 2023 before getting released in the offseason. Tyrell Dodson only started 5 games in his 3 seasons before starting 10 for Buffalo this past year. You add another linebacker to the mix. Payton Wilson is a ball hawking linebacker that Mike McDonald is going to covet there in Seattle. Won the Bednarik, won the Butkus Award. Let's see, it's actually 2 ACL tears and a major shoulder injury in his career. So those are the medical red flags. Everything else tells me that if this guy can stay healthy, and that's a big if, he's got all pro potential and could be a steal. Seattle could very well trade up for him. I think the Cowboys are another team that would love to get their hands on Payton Wilson. But 81 overall to the Seahawks doesn't feel unrealistic, just given where the off-ball linebackers have been prioritized. Jeremiah Trotter Jr., Clemson linebacker, 6 foot, 228 pounds. I think a lot of people have him potentially mocked in round 2. I had him there for a while. I ultimately think round 3 feels about right for him. I've got him going to Dallas. I think the Rams could easily take him as well. I've got him penciled in at 87 overall. And when you look at Trotter, he fills the stat sheet for you, right? I mean, back-to-back seasons with at least 88 tackles, had 28.5 tackles for loss, 12 sacks, 4 interceptions, 10 pass breakups, 3 forced fumbles, and a partridge in a pear tree during his final 2 seasons at Clemson. Trusts his eyes in coverage, drives quickly on the ball. You'll see him scrape over the top and meet the running back off tackle. Also has the speed to chase down the running backs to the sideline. Takes the proper angle. Good timing on his blitzes. Uses his hands and lateral agility to avoid blocks to get to the quarterback. Biggest thing for him is the lack of overall size, but he's instinctive, much like his dad was. And I think Jeremiah Trotter, a team is going to be very happy landing him in round number 3. Look, I said it at the end of last podcast. 49ers understand who they are. And when you talk about linebacker play, their defense is led. Yes, there's Nick Bosa. Yes, there are a lot of other players there. But that defense is led by Fred Warner, who they got in round number 3, Dre Greenlaw, who they got in round number 5. Those are your guys right there, right? And that's really what stirred the drink. You look at KC. Chris Jones is the man, and that is your leader on defense. But when you talk about the play, Willie Gay, Leo Chenal, Nick Bolton, what did those 3 guys mean to that team? And Drew Tranquil, you add him into the mix. Those were guys that stepped up and made a ton of plays, and that's why San Francisco and KC, one of the big reasons why they were in the Super Bowl. Obviously, you got Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, you got Brock Purdy, but the offense doesn't tell the entire story. You talk about defense winning championships, linebacking group. Those were some playmakers. So I keep talking about that. I keep looking at this linebacking core and this group. And yes, there isn't a ton of depth. It's not the best year to get an off-ball linebacker, but there is some good depth in these early to mid rounds. And I think you can still get some playmakers, jump on them while you can, because they're going to go pretty quickly. You look at Trevin Wallace out of Kentucky at 6'1", 237, another guy that I think is going to come off the board in round number 3. Trevin Wallace is another tremendous athlete, guy that flies around to the football. Round 3, definitely not out of the question with him. When I look at his fit, I look at Tennessee. Tennessee lost Azeez Al-Shire. That definitely hurt. They bring in Kenneth Murray in free agency, but they need another linebacker to line up next to him. And with Wallace, he can cover a lot of ground in the middle of that defense. Great job scraping over the top. Speed to get outside as well. He works around that line of scrimmage. The ability to knife in, blow up a run play, can shoot gaps, get after the quarterback as well. 6'1", 237 pounds. At the combine, this was another guy that was a workhorse, ran 4.5, 140. What was interesting though was 1.62 10-yard split. Not incredibly explosive, so it was more build-up speed. 37.5-inch vertical leap though, so there's some good lower body explosiveness out of him. Third round doesn't feel out of the question. I look at Gabriel Murphy out of UCLA, 6'2", 247 pounds. This guy's going to be a 34 outside linebacker, right? But he's a guy that I think would be a great fit in a lot of different programs. I look at Seattle. Seattle again. I think my mock right now has him at 118 overall. I think that's the 4th round. He's coming off the board on day 2. There's no doubt about that. When I look at Seattle, you talk about Boye Mafe, career year, 9 sacks. Darrell Taylor, 5.5 sacks. He's now in a contract year. Uchenna Nwosu, limited to 6 games due to an injury. You're hoping he rebounds. Derek Hall didn't manage any production, but I think Hall is going to get more attention, get onto the field a little bit more, but I think they need another edge rusher. I look at, even Houston could potentially bring in Gabriel Murphy, even though he's undersized. He'd have to put his hand in the dirt a little bit more, but I think Gabriel Murphy's a guy that, there's some teams, there are quite a few teams that could utilize Gabriel Murphy. One of the top sack artists in the Pac-12 in 2023, getting to the quarterback 8 times. He's not just a one-trick pony either. That's the thing. Early penetration on run plays, a knack for blowing those plays up. 37 tackles for loss in his career at North Texas and UCLA. Quick first step, uses those hands well. You'll see the chop, slap, rip at the offensive tackle's hands. Gains that edge, speed to run that arc in a hurry and pressure the quarterback. Gabriel Murphy, to me, I think feels like a 3rd rounder. You could probably take that to the bank. Junior Colson out of Michigan, 6'2", 238 pounds. And Junior Colson is another guy that I think could come off the board in round number 3. I had him penciled in to Atlanta just to add some depth to that spot, but I'm looking at the Packers as well. Isaiah McDuffie is filling in for Devondre Campbell. He's taking over that spot. I think you need to not only add depth, but you need to push McDuffie for playing time next to Quay Walker, and I think Colson can do that. He's instinctive both against the run and the pass, takes proper angles to the football, trusts his eyes, can play fast, and he just feels like one of those guys that should be a day 2 contributor. Cedric Gray out of North Carolina, 6'1", 234 pounds. Is he a round 3 guy? Is he a round 4 guy? That's really the big question mark. I actually have him coming off the board in round number 3. And when I look at Cedric Gray, to me, he feels like a guy that the Rams would like to play next to Ernest Jones. I mentioned him, 145 tackles, 14 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. I thought Christian Roseboom stepped in really well, finished 4th on the team in tackles with 79. But they'll keep him back on a 1-year deal, but I think the Rams could potentially get an upgrade over him, and then if nothing else, get some much-needed depth. And Cedric Gray does a little bit of everything. He's a 3-year starter at Chapel Hill, finished with 348 tackles, 29 going for loss, 8.5 sacks, 5 interceptions, 13 pass breakups, 5 forced fumbles, 5 fumble recoveries. Play speed is exceptional. Ability to chase down the ball carriers from the backside, crashes downhill, shoots gaps, proven to be effective in man coverage as well. He will over-pursue his run gaps, gets a little too aggressive. Seems to be a step slow in zone coverage as well. So I think an NFL defensive coordinator will need to coach him up, see if that processing can match the play speed as well. That's going to be the big question mark there with Cedric Gray. And then one final guy in terms of the edge rush position, and that's Chris Braswell out of Alabama, 6'3", 251 pounds. I think a lot of love goes to Dallas Turner, and rightfully so. Chris Braswell was kind of the forgotten man. But I look at a team like Atlanta. I think Atlanta's going to double dip at the edge rush position just because they struggle to get pressure on the quarterback. They finished with 42 sacks. Its highest total in the last 10 years. But the edge rush position wasn't the huge source of most of those sacks. Bud Dupree led the group with 6.5. He's a free agent, not expected back. Ebiketie, 6 sacks, up from just 2.5 in his rookie year. Lorenzo Carter not making the impact, only got to the quarterback just 3 times. No other edge rusher was able to bring down the quarterback. Even if Atlanta drafts Turner or Latu in round 1, they need another edge rusher, and I think Braswell makes a lot of sense. Gets a good jump off the ball, uses his hands well. Nice rip move coming off the edge. He's not going to blow you away against the run or in coverage, which is why I think he could potentially fall to round number 4, but racked up 8 sacks this past season, finally given time to be a full-time starter. He's one of those guys that I think is going to continue to develop at that next level. So when you look at round number 3, over the last really 3 and 5 years, the average is 6. So when we talk about round 3, if we look at Payton Wilson, Jeremiah Trotter, Trevin Wallace, Gabriel Murphy, Junior Colson, Cedric Gray, there's your 6. And I think that feels about right. Like I said, Chris Braswell, to me, I think he's a little overrated. I think he's a guy that I would take on day 3, the beginning of day 3. He feels to me more like a situational pass rusher at this point. The guy that's still continuing to develop will be a nice special teams guy, but I don't know that I want to use a day 2 pick on a guy that's going to be a special teams guy. When you look at 2023 in the 4th round, we had 2 come off the board, if you'll recall. That was Ventrell Miller and Nick Herbig. Prior to that, in 2022, we just have 1 in round 4, which was Brandon Smith to the Panthers. I think Braswell could very well be the only guy coming off the board in round 4 this year. But I look at round 5, we got 4 guys that I think are going to be playmakers. At least the potential to be a playmaker. I look at Bookie Watson out of Mississippi State, 6'2", 233 pounds. I think my mock shows him right now in round number 6, but I'm a big fan of his. So when I say Boogie Watson, I'm talking about Nathaniel Watson. He's a big physical dude, not overly explosive, but look, back-to-back seasons with at least 110 tackles, 137 this past year, 13 tackles for loss, 10 sacks. He's, the last 3 years with the Bulldogs, he's progressively gotten better as a pass rusher, and he's one of those guys that just feels like he can be a 3-down linebacker. He really does. I think coverage is where he's going to struggle the most, but I look at round 5. He could potentially get into round 4, but I think round 5 feels about the right spot for him, and I'm a big fan of his. I look at Jordan McGee out of Temple, another guy, 6'1", 228 pounds. Jordan McGee just feels like a guy that belongs with the 49ers. I look at 176 overall. They brought in Devondre Campbell, 1-year deal. The battle, with injuries, kept him from playing a full season in the last two years there with the Packers, and so I think McGee just kind of feels like the type of versatile linebacker that would fit well with what John Lynch is wanting to do on defense. Underrated, ability to play behind the line of scrimmage, 31 tackles for loss, 8 sacks in his career, could drop into coverage, make plays on the football with an interception, 10 pass breakups in his career as well. He's one of those guys. I think of Dre Greenlaw coming off the board in round 5. I think Jordan McGee could absolutely do the same thing. I look at Jalen Ford out of Texas, 6'2", 240 pounds. Ran a 4.68 at Texas's pro day. 10.6 broad jump, 18 reps at 225 as well. Good change of direction skills. That's something that really played well for Jalen Ford. And look, at Texas, a lot of the other guys got the publicity, right? I mean, when you're talking about Byron Murphy II and Devondre Sweat on the defensive side of the ball, but this guy was a model of consistency over the last 2 years. 119 tackles in 2022, 101 this past season, at least 10 tackles for loss each of the last 2 years as well. Had 6 interceptions, including 4 in 2022. So a guy that has a nose for the ball. Also 3 forced fumbles in 2022, 4 total over the last 2 years. And I look at Jalen Ford, and for a while I had him penciled in as a round 4 linebacker, but ultimately I've got him drop into round 5, and it's not really an indictment on him by any means. I think Ford could potentially even come off the board to the Texans, but I've got him penciled in there at 161 to the Eagles, the pick that they got from Tampa Bay. We know that Dean's locked in as one of the starters. Devin White brought in as a 1-year deal. needs to prove that he can hold on to that other starting spot. I think depth is still a concern there. And Ford, look, again, very active, a guy that I think will fit well in that group. He has a nose for the football. That's what the Eagles are looking for there at that linebacker position. And I thought he was really a leader on that defensive side of the football for the Texas Longhorns. So that feels like a right fit for me there. Tyron Hopper out of Missouri, 6'2", 231 pounds. This is a guy that a lot of people have coming off the board in round number 3, at round 4 at the latest. I look at Tyron Hopper, and I see a tremendous athlete. I think this is a guy that was a leader there for Mizzou after transferring from Florida. Good change of direction skills. A guy that showed just tremendous range, right? Outside the numbers on one play, fills the gaps downhill on the next. Can be a step slow at times. That's really the biggest thing that I noticed. But he can produce in coverage, ability to drive on the pass quickly, drop the receiver in the open field without allowing any yak. I look at Arizona, 162 overall. Like I said, they brought in Mack Wilson to compete with Chris Barnes because you're White and Owen Papo, but Barnes and White are both in contract year. You get a linebacker to compete for playing time and add some depth to the position. I think Tyron Hopper could be that guy. And then one final guy that we could potentially pencil in here, and that's Tyrus Knight out of UTEP. 6 foot, 233 pounds, and I thought Tyrus Knight had a big year for the Miners of UTEP. Like I said, 6 foot, 233, but was all over the field. Banner year, 140 tackles, 15.5 going for loss, 4.5 sacks, 7 pass breakups. This was a guy who just had a tremendous feel for the game. Diagnosis plays early, flows quickly to the football, range and coverage as well. I look at Washington sitting there at 139 overall, and look, they brought in Bobby Wagner, Frankie Louvu, Michael Walker, Anthony Pittman, but the will, Jamin Davis, final year of his contract. I think the Commanders could be looking for a high-end developmental linebacker to bring in as insurance. I think Tyrus Knight can end up filling in that will backer spot if Jamin Davis leaves at the end of the 2024 season. So, last 5 years, we've seen 5.8. Really, the big reason why that number is as high as it is because we had 11 come off the board in 2019. But you're right around 5 in the 3-year average. So if we've got 5 coming off the board here, that feels right about in that neighborhood, right in that ballpark. You get to round 6, and I look at Edgerrin Olafosio out of Washington, 6 foot, 236 pounds, undersized, yes, but he's one of the better linebackers in coverage in all of college football. We saw the play that he made. I keep talking about it anytime I talk about this guy, but it just is a microcosm of his ability to play in coverage, where he's lined up, really rushing the passer on this 4th and 1 play, and Roman Wilson ends up running an out from the slot, and Olafosio plants, drives to the outside, and is able to undercut that route right there at the sideline, that out route, and knock the football away to force a turnover on downs. Exceptional range. This is another guy that's battled injuries. His first year where he actually was able to play an entire season was in 2023, and he's played 6 years there at Washington. 94 tackles, 8 for loss, 3 sacks. Again, coverage ability. The injuries, that's a definite concern, but I love the way that he's able to showcase that coverage, those coverage skills. And so 6th round, I think, still feels like the right fit. 178 overall going to the Steelers. Steelers, again, can be looking for that interior, that inside linebacker help. And so Edgerrin Olafosio, I think if nothing else, would be a nice special teams contributor. I look at Tommy Eichenberg out of Ohio State, 6'2", 233. I think people have him coming off the board as high as the 3rd round, possibly even the 4th. I look at him. He's definitely a middle linebacker, a guy that is probably going to be lining up in an even man front. His best year was 2022 with 120 tackles, 12 going for loss, 2.5 sacks. But this is a guy who is instinctive. He plays fast. Shows pretty good range as well. I'm looking at Minnesota at 177 overall at the top of round number 6. And the reason for that is they've got Blake Cashman, they've got Ivan Pace. There's Brian Asamoah, there's Kamu Grugier Hill, but I look at the group and I think you could add another linebacker here for depth and a guy that can end up pushing for some playing time with this group. And I think Tommy Eichenberg could potentially fill in there. And look, I just threw him to a team that has an odd man front. Trying to figure out exactly where we will place him. I think he could potentially go to Houston. Obviously, Houston has made a big play getting Azeez Al-Shire there, but they don't have depth. And this is a guy that I think you can put in as a backup there in Houston. I think that could make a lot of sense. What about Chicago? Chicago doesn't have a ton of draft picks. You've got Tremaine Edmonds there in the middle, Noah Sewell. Another guy that you could potentially throw into the mix. I think Dallas, if Dallas is interested in a middle linebacker right now, Damone Clark is that guy. They also have DeMarvion Overshown playing that Mike potential. But Tommy Eichenberg could be another guy that they could bring in and add some depth and some of that competition. So those are a couple of spots. One other team to think of is New England. I think New England would be another potential fit. You've got Jawan Bentley. They brought in Sione Takitaki. But, again, depth and competition, that's another spot that I could potentially see Tommy Eichenberg coming off the board, just trying to push for playing time. Curtis Jacobs out of Penn State, 6'1", 241 pounds. And, I thought 4.58 40, 35-inch vertical leap, that 4.58, that was kind of a surprise for me. I wasn't expecting him to run really as fast as he did. But this is a guy that was a staple there for Penn State for a number of years in that linebacking core. Started every game in each of the last 3 seasons. 24 tackles for loss, 9.5 sacks. Flies around, makes plays in the running game and behind the line of scrimmage. Not a huge impact in the passing game, and that's why I have him falling to round number 6. Jacobs, I think, ultimately could end up playing on the outside in an even man front. I ultimately have him coming off the board to Indy at 191. When we talk about Indy, we look at where they're at, and could Indy be another place for Tommy Eichenberg? Possibly as a backup for Zaire Franklin. I think that could make a lot of sense. And then when I look at EJ Speed there as the will, I think Curtis Jacobs can end up pushing for playing time there as well. So that's not out of the realm of possibility. Maris Lufau out of Notre Dame. I know there are a lot of people that really like him at 6'2", 234 pounds. Versatile. I think that's one of the things that you definitely see with him. A guy that can drop into coverage, a pretty reliable tackler, seems to be always in the right place at the right time. Of the 2 Notre Dame linebackers, I'm higher on Lufau because of that. I think the ability to cover tight ends, running backs out of the backfield, that's something that you're going to be seeing from Lufau. And where I have him slated there in round 6, I got him going to the Saints at 190 overall. And when you look at the Saints and you talk about their depth at the linebacker position, the reason why I've got him penciled in there is you got starters are set, right? Pete Werner, Demario Davis, Willie Gay. Behind that, there are some question marks. They brought in Khaleke Hudson. DeMarco Jackson is kind of being prepped to potentially take over for Demario Davis. But I think after that, there's some question marks in that depth. And so that's where Maris Lufau could potentially come in and be one of those guys, especially with some of his cover ability, being able to see the field early on because of that. Grayson Murphy out of UCLA, a guy that we didn't see at the Combine, but a guy that I was really impressed with because he played a lot like his brother. And 36.5 tackles for loss, 21.5 sacks. And really his biggest year was the last year there at North Texas. And 14.5 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks. And when you talk about what Gabriel Murphy brought to the table compared to his brother there at North Texas, 17 tackles for loss, 12 sacks, right? 12 and a half tackles for loss and 7 sacks in that 2021 season. When you look at 18 and a half tackles for loss and 11 and a half sacks for Grayson Murphy. So they were really just a half sack away from really having that, and I think 1 tackle for loss away from having the exact same numbers. And he was pretty consistent over his last 2 years. Grayson Murphy was there at UCLA. 9 tackles for loss, 5 sacks each of those 2 years at UCLA. And really the big difference with him and Gabriel Murphy is, his brother exploded in 2023. Grayson was actually the better edge rusher coming off the edge in 2022. But it was the explosion of Gabriel Murphy. You saw, the hand usage. You saw his ability to work to the quarterback. That was really what stood out more so than Grayson this past year. And look, I think Grayson could come off the board earlier. He could come off the board in round number 5 potentially, but in round 6, that feels like a good fit. Just because there's so much depth in with all of these other positions that it's going to be difficult finding a place for a lot of these guys. Packers could potentially use another edge rusher. That's why I have him coming off the board towards the end of round number 6 to the pack. And again, trying to find a place for these guys. We're talking about the draft picks. I don't mock any trades or anything like that. I'm looking for fits more than anything else. So even though I have him towards the end of round number 6, I think the reason why I have him there is the Packers, they could potentially use another edge rusher. And I look at Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, Lucas Van Ness, there's Kingsley Enagbare, but I look at that group. They could use one more edge rusher, have him compete with Colby Wooden, Brenton Cox, Deslin Alexander. Those are guys that I think Grayson Murphy can beat out and add to that really round out that edge rush group there in Green Bay. That's really my group for round number 6. So again, if we're scoring at home here, that's going to end up being another 5. Round 6, what's our 3 and 5 year average? 5. So we feel pretty good about that. Then we get to round number 7. In round 7, I'm looking at Jontre Hunter out of Georgia State, 6'2", 236 pounds. A guy that, look, he's played safety in his career. I'm looking at the Chiefs, at 221 overall at the top of round number 7. The reason why I have Hunter penciled in here is I think they could use some depth at that linebacker position behind Tranquil, Bolton, and Chenal. And I think Jontre Hunter could absolutely do that. You saw him at the Senior Bowl with some speed, some absolute speed, getting inside out, chasing the ball carrier all the way to the sideline. 234 tackles, 22 and a half tackles for loss, 6 sacks, 3 interceptions, 8 pass breakups, 7 forced fumbles. This dude flies around to the football, and he can come off the board earlier. Could potentially be a steal there in round 7. I look at Steel Chambers out of Ohio State, 6'1", 226 pounds. With Steel Chambers, his name just feels like a football player. He feels like he should be playing in Pittsburgh, right? Because of that name. A guy that can drop into coverage at 4 interceptions, 5 pass breakups, plays around the line of scrimmage, tough, physical linebacker. But round 7 is really where I think Steel Chambers is likely to end up coming off the board. For a while, I didn't have him drafted. I look at Miami. Miami's a potential fit for Steel Chambers. I mentioned that Jerome Baker's no longer there. They bring in Jordan Brooks. They've got David Long there. Anthony Walker, Duke Riley. I think you could end up putting him in that group and push for some playing time. Aaron Casey out of Indiana is another one. 6'1", 231 pounds. And when I look at Aaron Casey, this is a guy that was the leader of that Hoosier defense. And 109 tackles this past season, 20 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks. He plays right around that line of scrimmage, and the production is absolutely there. He's not the best athlete. Ran a 4.75 40, just a 9.9 broad jump. But this is a guy that is instinctive. He plays fast. Will come downhill. He'll hit you in the mouth. I think the lateral agility, there's some question marks there. But the Ravens. I think the Ravens are probably going to potentially target a couple of inside backers. They've got him at 228 overall. And when we talk about Baltimore, we look at that inside linebacker position, and what do they have? They got Roquan Smith, they got Trenton Simpson, they picked up Chris Board. There's Josh Ross on the roster, but there's not a lot of depth behind Smith and Simpson right now, and so I think they do double dip at the inside backer position. Aaron Casey could be one of those guys, and he just feels like a Raven type because of his ability to play around the line of scrimmage. And then J.D. Bertrand out of Notre Dame, 6'1", 235. I think there's some definite physical limitations there to J.D. Bertrand's game, but you love the leadership ability. You love the instincts with him. Had 102 tackles in 2021, 227 total in his career, 22.5 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks. A guy, look, 9 pass breakups, including 5 this past season. He's a guy that really trusts his eyes, and that allows him to play a lot faster, anticipation. So that's going to cut down on some of those physical limitations, right? But a guy that I think could end up finding his way onto a roster because of, special teams, because of that instincts and his ability to find the football. Look at Cleveland. I've got 227 overall. And when we talk about Cleveland and that inside linebacker position, middle linebacker is Jordan Hicks. There's Mohamed Diabate. But Hicks, is he the long-term answer there with the Cleveland Browns? That's a big question mark. I think when I was talking about Tommy Eichenberg and trying to find the right fit, Cleveland actually would probably be the best fit for him. But J.D. Bertrand, if Cleveland decides that they're not going to focus on that linebacker spot just yet, J.D. Bertrand could be a guy that you can pick up in round number 7 and add some depth. So with that would be 4 coming off the board in round number 7. We have 4 as an average in round 5, or in the 5-year average, 3 as a 3-year average. So we're right in that ballpark at the end of the draft. It's just this group is not very top heavy. We don't have a lot of guys that are going to come off the board in round 1 or round 2. In fact, I've got 2 coming off the board in the first 2 rounds, and that just doesn't happen. We had 5 last year. Again, 4 of them were edge rushers. So when you look at Dallas Turner, there's still just that one that will come off the board in the first 2 rounds of the draft. Edgerrin Cooper, Payton Wilson, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., potentially 3 linebackers in round number 2. I just don't know that any of those guys, I don't think that Edgerrin Cooper is going to be in round 1. And just the fact that outside of the Lions, no other team targeted an off-ball linebacker until round number 3. That says something. So other guys in this linebacker group to consider: Khalid Duke out of K-State, 6'3", 246. Here's another edge rusher for you. And Khalid Duke, look, he was a defensive end for K-State. Ultimately, will be a linebacker at the next level. 21 tackles for loss, 14 sacks. This was a guy that I think everyone was expecting to emerge at some point, and he has gotten better as a sack artist, but I think he was really being counted upon in 2023, and he didn't live up to those expectations. 4.7, 940 at the combine, 34-inch vertical leap. They're okay. They're not phenomenal. A little underwhelming, I would say. Easton Gibbs out of Wyoming at 6 foot, 232 pounds. Look, Wyoming, Logan Wilson, Chad Muma, and Easton Gibbs is the guy that I think could end up getting drafted, and if not, he'll find his way onto an NFL roster. 361 tackles in his career, 22.5 going for loss, 7 sacks, 11 pass breakups. Instinctive, very instinctive. I think he's a guy that could come off the board in round 5 or 6. I don't have him in my mock right now. He may be in my final mock because, again, he's one of those guys I love watching him play because he'll take you to the football. He'll absolutely do that on each and every play. Michael Barrett of Michigan, undersized at 5'11", 233. I thought really he was overwhelmed by some of the other Michigan standouts there on defense. He's one of those guys that never really stood out, and I think he'll have a hard time getting drafted. He may be a priority free agent. I look at the 2 Florida State linebackers. Tatum Bethune, Kalen DeLoach, they're both undersized. Kalen DeLoach looks more like like a safety at 5'11 and a half, 210. Tatum Bethune at 5'11, 229. He's a little bit of the bigger, thicker back. And with Tatum Bethune, this was a guy, he started his career at UCF, had 108 tackles there with them. Comes to Florida State, 154 tackles, 15 going for loss, 3 sacks. And then Kalen DeLoach, another guy, spent his entire career there at FSU, 24 and a half tackles for loss, 11 sacks, including 7 this past season. A guy that really averaged right around 65 tackles in each of the last 3 years, 7 pass breakups. A guy that offers a little bit, rushing the passer and in coverage, but I think he's more so, where do you play him, because he is so undersized. He's more so of a safety. I think that lack of overall length is what's going to hurt both of those guys and their chances to get drafted. Same goes for Darius Muasau, 6 foot 225. I think he's just an average athlete, ran a 4.7 40, good instincts. This is a guy that I thought really came on there at UCLA, really developed into a solid linebacker and a guy that we were talking about potentially getting himself drafted. I mean, at Hawaii, over 100 tackles in each of his last 2 years there. Goes to UCLA, 91 tackles. Then this past year, 75 tackles, 10 and a half going for loss. This is a guy that once had 14 tackles for loss and 7 sacks at the University of Hawaii, along with 5 forced fumbles. So the guy can get after it, can get after the football. Maybe he's a late day 3 guy. I just don't know about the limited athletic ability there, and the limited length is what concerns me. Zion Tupuola-Fatui at 6'3", 244. You talk about edge rushers. Zion is one of those guys that there was that potential that never really got fulfilled, right? In 2020, in 3 games, had 7 sacks. But then injuries and just really got slowed up, really never got that career going. 8 sacks in his last 2 seasons combined. Zion, to me, those injuries really slowed him up, and I think that's ultimately where he's going to have to find his way onto a roster as a priority free agent. Same goes for Jalen Green out of James Madison. After Isaac Ukwu ended up moving to Mississippi, he bursts onto the scene in 9 games, 21 tackles for loss, 15 and a half sacks, explosive coming off the edge, but at 6'1", 246 pounds, he's very undersized. He's not the most explosive guy by any means, and then he also tears his ACL, so any chance of him getting drafted late kind of goes out the window. Jackson Sermon out of Cal. He's got the bloodlines, obviously. His dad, Peter Sermon, Oregon standout, played with Tennessee as well. Tremendous coach. And when you talk about Jackson Sermon, he's one of those guys that I think has the cover ability. Started his career at Washington before coming to Cal. 104 tackles in 2022. Bit with the injury bug a bit. Only played in 6 games this past year. 6'3", 235. A guy, again, coverage is what you see there. A guy that is pretty intelligent and makes plays around the line of scrimmage. Omar Spates out of LSU. Omar Spates is another guy that, he looked good at Oregon State, and then he leaves. He's 6'1", 237. Oregon State his last year, 8 tackles for loss, 83 total tackles. Going to LSU, I think everyone was expecting him to have a breakout year. Did not register a single tackle for loss. No interceptions, no pass breakups, 70 total tackles in 10 games played. Just didn't really make the impact that anyone was expecting. And I think that really has hurt his draft stock to the point where maybe he's a round 7 guy, but I think he'll ultimately be an undrafted free agent as well. One final guy to talk about is Luke Reimer out of Nebraska. Tough, physical dude, 6'1", 220. Played in 10 games in each of the last 2 years. And I don't think he really has risen to the level of that 2021 season where he had 108 total tackles. But this past season, he was utilized a little bit more as a pass rusher. 5 sacks, career high there. 7.5 tackles for loss. In the previous 2 years, 11 pass breakups, a couple of interceptions as well, so he could showcase his ability to drop into coverage. He's a guy that a team could take a flyer on there in round number 7. A guy that I think could end up excelling in special teams as well. 6'1", 220, not the biggest linebacker by any means, but Nebraska linebackers again, if we're talking about adding a couple of guys to the mix, we only have 23, which is way off of the 3-year average of 28, and not even close to what we had in 2023 with 25, right? So if we add a couple of guys, I think we might add Easton Gibbs, Darius Muasau, Luke Reimer. There's 3 additional linebackers that I would add to my mock, and if we did that, that's still, that brings us to 26, which is actually one higher than 2023, one lower than 2021, and a couple off of the 3-year average, thanks to that 2022 draft where we saw 33 taken. We're not going to see that happen in this year's draft. I think 26, 27, maybe, if one of the Florida State kids gets drafted, then that's probably your ceiling. So anywhere in that 23 to 27 range is really what we're looking at. And again, we're not going to see a whole lot at the front end of this draft. It's really going to be maybe second round, but more than likely third round. And then the depth is going to be in the 4th, 5th, and even the 6th round of the draft. Linebacker, it's not a strong draft for off-ball linebacker play. And really, had it not been for Dallas Turner, we might be talking about just one linebacker, potentially 2 with Payton Wilson, potentially 3 with Jeremiah Trotter, coming off the board in the first 2 rounds of this year's draft. Kind of crazy when you think about it, but that's just kind of the way the game is going. And if Drew Sanders can fall to number 67 overall in the 2023 draft, Trenton Simpson to 86 when everyone was expecting him to be first or second rounders. That's I keep going back to that mentality, and maybe it's cyclical. Maybe we'll go back to seeing more guys coming off the board like we did in 2022. I don't see it happening. I just don't. There aren't enough guys in this draft class to. So we'd be making history there. History tells us we should be seeing at least a couple of guys drafted in the first 2 rounds. But we'd be making history if we just saw 2 guys taken in the first 2 rounds. That would really speak to a leveling off of this position, and really talking about devalue. That's devaluing to the nth degree. Parallels what we see there with the running backs, where I only have 1, maybe 2 running backs coming off the board in the first 2 rounds of the draft as well. So we'll go ahead and put an end to the linebacker position. We've got the defensive backs. Need to make sure that we get through that group. We're going to combine the corners and safeties when we talk about the defensive backs, and we'll also throw in the specialists while we're at it. Why not? They're players too. We can talk about the kickers and punters and where I see those guys coming off the board as well, because that is going to impact the draft overall, the number of picks that we're going to be seeing spread out across all of the positions. And then from there, we're going to take a look at my final mock. I'll get into that, talk through the first round and really where I see these guys lining up and where they're landing. I don't want to get into any of the hype, like I said, with J.J. McCarthy potentially going number 2 overall. Could it happen? Absolutely. Do I think it should happen? No way. I think, the other 2 guys are more proven commodities, and I think, yes, you look at the film and you can see that with J.J. McCarthy, but find me a quarterback that was taken in the top two or 3 picks that falls into the same category in the same situation as J.J. McCarthy. It's one of those things where we're doing a lot of projecting there. And you're going to take him over the reigning Heisman Trophy winner and Jaden Daniels and Drake May, who has largely been the number 2 quarterback on everybody's board going into this pre-draft process. Just feels a little weird there. So feels like a lot of smoke. We'll talk through a lot of that as well. So until next time, everyone, for ReadyForTheDraft.com, this has been the Ready for the Draft podcast. I've been your host, Gregg Schutze. Take care, everyone. Enjoy your weekend. Until next time, I am out of here.